changing gears a little bit, because we've been talking quite a bit about third parties. One of the questions that comes to my mind anyway is one of training and awareness for not only utility staffs and their contracted agents, but also for those third parties and consumers. To what extent, and well, who, and to what extent are they responsible for making sure that training and awareness of privacy and its implications is in place?
I'll lead off on that. I mean, you talked about two different arenas. One is the internal training and awareness among the utilities employees and those vendors that they work with closely. The second is really kind of the training or education of the consumer. I think, you know, the utility obviously has to make compliance a top priority. There are very drastic consequences for us if we are not in compliance with rules and regulations. We are heavily regulated, and we strive for a culture that supports compliance because the alternative has too many dire consequences. So we have to make sure that we have policies and procedures in place that support our compliance. We have to have contractual provisions that say that our vendors need to be aware of our policies and procedures and to act consistent with that. I think as you see customer energy usage data become more and more private, or at least be more and more scrutinized, you're going to start to see contractual obligations being put into contracts between utilities and vendors that are going to be similar to what you may have seen around PII. Things like minimum levels of security, notice in the event of a security breach, limitations on use strictly for the purpose that's contracted for and no other. You know, these sorts of things that we've started to see in the last 5 years or so, really focused around those elements of identity theft. Guess what? Customer energy usage data is now, if it isn't full on PII, it's something close, and you're going to see those contractual provisions be put in place with your vendors. When you think about it from the customer standpoint, I'll just give you a little story. My father lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and he is a customer of a utility in that state. And they put a smart meter on the outside of his house. And since his daughter works in the utility industry, he calls me up and he says, "What is a smart meter?" Now, obviously, I did my father a dire disservice because I went into quite a bit of detail about the pros and cons of a smart meter. By the time I was done, and this is probably a generational thing as well, he immediately gets on the phone to his utility and asks them what is their privacy policy and what are they doing with his data. The problem there was the person that he spoke to, the frontline person for that utility, couldn't answer his questions. He was referred up 3 people within that call center, none of whom gave him a satisfactory answer. He went to the website. He didn't find anything on there about his privacy with regard to a smart meter. He finally got a nice little letter that basically said something to the effect of, "Trust us." My father was not very satisfied with this. He still lives in fear of what his personal habits may be out there on the internet. I try to explain to him they probably haven't even figured out how to get his personal habits to the internet yet. He's probably still safe. But I think that that speaks to the fact that if you are going to deploy smart meter technology as a utility, you need to have information out there that addresses this issue. If someone is to Google, you know, smart meter privacy, they will be bombarded with information that may cause them a great deal of concern. You should put information out there that says, what are your privacy policies? How can they gain access to them? If there's a consent process for release, how do they get that information? Your frontline people should be able to at least answer simple, basic questions related to this. Otherwise, you have a situation such as my father, who now equates his utility as to being his privacy enemy.
And my father, being a former Pennsylvania lineman, would have just gone down to First Energy and knocked on somebody's door. Forget the internet. True. I mean, most utilities and third parties that collect data should have that privacy policy, you know, on their website, a link to click on it. But have you ever tried to read those documents? And what is an affiliate or a partner? You know, as a consumer, you don't know. So from the inside, as Megan was saying, we should have our own internal privacy sessions training as to even just the definition of consumer information. I mean, if you walked up to 10 people within your business, would you get 10 different definitions? Especially looking at the individual data elements. With being one of the volunteers with the CSWG privacy subgroup, I've been helping outreach with some of the local Raleigh area privacy groups. And because they don't know Smart Grid, I do an overview of Smart Grid. And by the second slide, their chins are hitting the floor with, what? And then I say, this information was available before. Now it's just automated. Oh, well then still, all of these questions are coming up. But from the consumer, you know, where do they go? What questions should they ask? Yes, there are consumer privacy groups, but do they even know to go to those groups to ask what questions or who to contact? What should I do? Because you do have multi-generational consumers out there, some that are very technology savvy, and others like my father who haven't turned on a computer in over 3 years. A cell phone is a novelty to him. So how do you do that complete blend of consumer training and get the point across of how to contact and who to contact just to ask the questions? So that consumer training, from my perspective, is actually missing. Internally, yeah, it's definitely getting better. But, and also, as Megan said, that first line training does need to be done. Those that answer the phone need to know what are some basic questions that I can ask, that FAQ that most companies have.
There's so much to talk about, right? It's overwhelming. But Cindy, one issue you brought up, I think that's important, is what we understand to be personal information that is processed through the grid. And there are, of course, different definitions under U.S. laws, privacy laws, that are very fragmented. But if we look at the Federal Trade Commission, that will have jurisdiction over these third parties and some jurisdiction over utilities as well, they're moving away from defining that information as being tied to a particular individual. In fact, the latest report from the FTC on privacy talked about personal information as information being reasonably, that is able to reasonably trace a device or a computer. So that definition is really expanding. And again, looking at third parties that are subject to FTC's jurisdiction, Federal Trade Commission, how will they get guidance on privacy? That's a very good question, because if we look at the world of behavioral advertising, it's sort of a Wild West even today. And it's sort of like a rubber room where they bounce off different enforcement mechanisms, FTC enforcement, publicity, Wall Street Journal investigations, class actions. And so here, there should be a drive to look at the work that's been done today by FTC and by other organizations, and to try to build privacy considerations into the new products that are coming onto the market. I mean, but the burden is on these third parties to do that on their own, because, and this is sort of the theme that we've seen here today, that you want to learn from mistakes that others have made. For consumers, it's really a very complicated issue. Well, how do consumers know how their personal information is used? That's not an easy question to ask. I mean, I think that the approach now is to say, well, there are certain primary uses of information that don't really raise huge privacy concerns, like optimizing energy delivery. I mean, as a consumer, I understand that my information will be used to make energy flow in a more efficient manner. But the secondary uses, the ones that are unexpected, you're right, nobody reads the privacy policy, nobody goes to that group. So there are different approaches that can be tried in this way, and one, for example, is in-time notice. Let's say when you sign up for a service, when you have that terminal installed, somebody should tell you that this is how we will use your information. Do you agree or not agree? It has to be something that's in time and very explicit if it's going to be effective. Otherwise, it is a struggle.
You know, I think that consumers, I mean, you want to make sure customers have, there's a certain transparency to how their data is going to be used. I think there's a certain amount of expectation there that when someone signs up for electric service, that their information, whether it be specific to them or aggregated, is going to be used to support the delivery of electric service back to them. What they probably aren't going to expect is that information would be given to, say, a appliance company so that they could develop better appliances. That is probably not transparent to them. And so trying to figure out at what point do you go and get that consumer's consent? Do you have to get the consent if it's aggregated? What is an appropriately anonymous level of aggregation? If you think it's anonymous when you aggregate it, but someone then overlays it against property records and other public data, is it sufficiently anonymous? You know, these are all the things I think we're struggling with to try and figure out what's going to make sense, because whether you're putting together rules in Colorado or whether you're just putting together your policies and procedures for how you operate in states who haven't even gotten there yet, there's a huge downside if we get it wrong.
Yeah, well,
Let me just add one quick thing. For public utility regulators, for state regulators, this is precisely the reason why it's important for them to work together and to understand what they're doing across the board, because data travels across states. And for a utility that operates in 8 states, it's going to be a nightmare to comply with 8 different sets of regulations, and it's inefficient.
Yes.
And if you look at the, or not just utilities, third parties, if you look at the market today, the regulatory landscape, it's very fragmented in the United States in terms of privacy. Let's take, federal laws, they cover different types of information, different types of companies, or state laws. There are 46 states have breach notification laws, and Washington, D.C. and some of the territories that are all different, and it's a compliance nightmare. So I think, as a lesson learned, public utilities should work together to come up with a comprehensive approach to the issues of privacy that would protect consumer privacy on the one hand, but on the other hand, promote innovation, and which would lead to job creation and all other things, leadership in that market. You know, something that we can export to other countries. I mean, it's jobs. You know, so you have to be aware of these considerations.
if I can kind of just for a half a second take off on something Megan said. You mentioned making sure that your own call center knows your privacy policy and can explain it clearly. One thing I would suggest to any of the utilities who are out there listening is also make sure that your PUC's call center, and if you have a consumer's counselor or consumer advocate's office, that their call center has the same information as your call center, because customers will call those different call centers and they will compare the answers they get.
Excellent point.
We got a question on the floor. Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of like re-stress a point, and you've been touching on this, but I think it's important for people to realize, and this really is something that continuously hits home with me, is consumers and users, ma and pa and everybody at different levels of technological adeptness are all going to be part of this equation. And they may, for example, they may trust their utility. And, you know, they may trust their Public Utility Commission is working in their best interest, and the Public Utility Commission says the utilities can only do so much with this information, and there's rules and there's regulations, and the utility may do a great job in convincing the consumers that they're doing a great job with all this information and such. But where it becomes, again, particularly sort of insidious is, again, with the third-party portion of it, right? You know, there's organizations that I've heard of, for example, they'll clamp something on the outside of your house that it's got nothing to do with your meter or your electric company. It reads emanations, or it may be something that you know, talks to all your home area network and devices. And let's say, for example, somebody goes with a third party. They understand the implications of this data and this privacy, and they know it's got nothing to do with their state. But then they sell the home to someone else, and they say, oh, by the way, we have this cool power meter system. Something happens, and then the consumer doesn't realize that it's got nothing to do with this utility or the Public Utility Commission that they may trust. It's unregulated completely. So the thing that I want to emphasize is, who is going to sort of like take the charge of making sure that these third parties are actually complying with some sort of set of privacy or security requirements for this information, or should somebody?
You know, Mike, I think it's an excellent question. I don't have an answer for you, but I agree that it's an area that is, I think, has a great deal of concern for us, because if something happens down the road, I think we'll be one of the first to get a phone call, whether it has anything to do with us or not. And, you know, if something happens, if someone finds that their information has gone viral and somehow this information is traceable back to them, they will pick up the phone and call the utility, even though it may be that it's, you know, the third-party device. You know, we struggle with this in Colorado as we're trying to come up with access rules. And, you know, the best that I think the state commission can do at this point is to require what are the elements going to be for informed consent by the customer? What should the customer have in front of them so that they can make a good decision as to whether to authorize that third-party access? But it does put that burden back on the customer to make sure they make a wise decision. And in the absence of that being a wise decision, who can they appeal to for redress? You know, they aren't going to be able to go to the state commission. The state commission won't regulate likely that third party. So where is their opportunity to lodge that complaint? You know, I'll put another example out there for you of a company that offers a service to customers to help them understand better how to conserve energy. And their method for getting the data is to get the customer's unique logon ID and password for their online account, and to be able to then access everything that's available off of that online account, which of course goes far beyond just the customer's usage information, but includes information related to their payment history, their method of payment, the programs they're signed up with. I'm sure there's lots of opportunity for data mining there. If, you know, does the customer understand the security issues there? Maybe, maybe not. They're going to get a 20% off coupon to Bed Bath & Beyond. You know,